Hey everybody, Scott here. Hope you're having a great day. It is time to look at San Diego's housing stats through April. And I think the thing that you're going to see the most exciting is how boring they are. Let's look at some charts and I'll show you why. So as I said in the intro, the best part about April's sales numbers is that they were boring and steady. And this pretty much shows it. If you look here, this is the detached median price. And for the third consecutive month, we moved up. Now, the increase slowed down a little bit, but I want to point out a couple key things. First is this was the peak. So this is April of 2022. March is when they started raising interest rates and we saw the decline. When we got into about December, that's when I started saying this felt much more like a correction than a crash. While everybody was claiming doomsday and the market was crashed, you're going to lose your home. And it turns out that it looks like we were right. And we reached that conclusion just basically on looking at inventory levels. Now, what I want to also show you is from the peak here in April to the trough in December, or actually January, we fell from $1 million to $849,000 as a median price. That's a 15% drop. We've already made 10% of that back. So we are now only 5% under the peak pre-interest rate hike, and that's a very good sign. So a little bit of perspective so you can kind of see historically where we've been. This goes back all the way to 2004. So here obviously you have this Shears and Lehman caused housing crash, and then we started to pick up. And I'll have more interesting data on that later. Want to show you a couple other charts that show why prices are being strong. So what we're looking at here is 3 years of sold data for the detached market. And you can see we took a dip here. That's about a 15% dip in 1 month. And we're actually 40% below where we were last year. And I can hear the questions already. Hey, Scott, doesn't that mean we have a demand problem? Does that mean prices are going to fall? No, not necessarily. Let's look a little bit deeper. If we look at the total number of new listings, you can also see that new listings on the market fell this month, and they fell by also about 15%. They're 50% below last year. So we're seeing something very unusual in our annual cycle, but completely understandable in our economic cycle. On the annual cycle, this is when we usually see more inventory, more sales as people come out for the summer sales season. On the economic cycle, with rates higher, we don't have the ability of people to move up. You can't sell a house at a 3% interest rate and buy a bigger house at a 6% interest rate. And that's why we're seeing both new listings down, and because new listings are down, that is making the solds down because there's just not as much to buy. The active listings here, you can see that the result of these sales and the new listings both being down, that the active listings have been flat. Now compare this February, March, April to where we were last year with February, March, April, and you can see how unusual it is that we're not taking off. Every year, if you go through here, we see big increases in inventory right about now, and we are not. And that is why prices are staying up, because although sales are down, they're down because there's nothing to buy. Now let's look at what shows that in one graph, which is months of inventory. And you can see here that our months of inventory, though it is up, it's only at 1.3. And you're going to say, well, that's a lot higher than it was back in 2022. But let's give it some historical perspective. If we look at the maximum, you can see we are still at record lows. And so I dove a little bit deeper into the data and came up with this following chart. For all you visually oriented people out here, this should drive home the point that inventory drives pricing. What we have here is the orange line is San Diego County detached months of inventory. The blue line is the median sales price. So just kind of stepping through it here, this was pre-crash. We rose up very quickly, 2003, 2004, kind of plateaued, and then came down hard. And you'll notice we really started to come down when inventory crossed right about 8 to 9 months of inventory. Then we peaked up here and started to come down with our inventory, and you can see as it once again crossed back on that 8 months, we started to rise. So we rose a little bit, and then inventory bounced up again closer to 8, and we leveled off, drifted down a little bit. But once it fell back down and really dropped below 6 and 5, we really started to see our prices take off. Then pre-COVID, we had a drop starting in July of 2019 that caused the market to really accelerate, and then it really exploded with the advent of COVID here in January 2020. We really kind of took off as inventory really fell. So what I want you to take away from this one chart is that until inventory gets up around this 5 to 6 month mark, we're not going to see downward pressure on the pricing. We're sitting at 1.3, so we've got quite a ways to go before we get to a point where I'm concerned about downward pressure on pricing. Now, there are a lot of issues out there in the commercial banking sector, a lot of commercial buildings that are going to go into default, and that's going to cause a lot more banks to fail. However, the question is, how does a commercial bank failing cause a residential owner to want to sell his property if he can't buy another one? In other words, if the banks fail and lending tightens up even further, that's going to be less incentive for current owners to sell their home because they won't be able to buy a replacement. And if you can't buy a replacement and your interest rate's at 3%, you're just going to camp out for a while. So I don't see an explosion of inventory that gets us to this 5, 6, 7, 8 months of inventory anytime soon. And without that, I don't see prices falling. I'll dive into this a little bit deeper in a later video where we look more at the commercial market, but just understand that the commercial market collapsing is not going to motivate owners with 3% loans to dump their houses on the market. So that's it for the April update. And as I said, kind of boring numbers makes for more exciting news, and I'm expecting more of the same next month. So until May, make it a great month, and I'll see you then.